This is a story of a man who grows up in the quiet farming community of Van Etten, New York, and ascends in society to a luxurious townhouse 2 blocks from Central Park. He then spends time in Sing Sing, and ultimately is buried with 1 million others on Hart Island. Hart Island is just off the coast of the Bronx in Long Island Sound. Since the 1800s, it has been home to a Union Civil War prison camp, a psychiatric institution, as well as a tuberculosis sanatorium. Hart Island is also home to over 1 million graves, mostly unmarked. This is where New York's poor or unclaimed bodies lie. Playwright, screenwriter, and director Leo Burinsky was buried here in 1951, dying penniless. American novelist Dawn Powell's body was not claimed by her estate 5 years after her death, having been used for science in that time. Academy Award winner Bobby Driscoll lies here, having succumbed to drug abuse later in life and his remains not being identified in a timely fashion. There are about 95,000 public records of graves at Potter's Field on Hart Island. The best place to begin seemed to be to look for people that had a picture and seemed interesting. This led to Stephen Ansel Dutton, whose picture looked like he would have lived a full life, an interesting life. The hope when choosing a headstone to research is that there will be information available about the person. It soon became apparent that information about Stephen was available, and there was plenty of it. He had lived a full life. Stephen, in fact, had been a notorious swindler. The date of Stephen's birthday remains a mystery. It was likely in the late 1850s, but he would change it to appear older at times. One of the many big stories he would concoct in his life. Stephen was born to John Dutton and Betsy May Hugg. John was at times a laborer, lumberman, stonemason, and a farmer. Stephen's oldest brother Alan would also become a mason and later a carpenter. Stephen grew up in the farming area of Van Etten, New York, the sixth of 10 children, surrounded by relatives who also farmed. Stephen's mother, Betsy, passed away in the spring of 1873 when he was just 14. 4 years later, in February of 1877, Stephen's father, John, dies. By 1880, Stephen was a hired laborer on a farm, still in his hometown of Van Etten, New York. In July of 1880, Stephen applies to inherit his father's estate of $5,000, or about $200,000 in today's dollars. Stephen is a striking figure at nearly 6 feet tall, 175 pounds, and a commanding voice. He met and married Cordelia Cornell on December 31st, 1887, in West Danby, New York. Together they had 4 children: Florence, Fred, Stephen Jr., and Carl Dutton. They would eventually move into 137 71st Street near Central Park in New York. The area was known for its stately mansions, elegant row houses, and tree-lined streets, which attracted affluent families and socialites. The neighborhood was characterized by its opulence and exclusivity, with prominent families such as the Vanderbilts, Astors, and Rockefellers building grand residences in the area. The Upper East Side was also home to prestigious private clubs such as the Knickerbocker Club and the Union Club, which served as gathering places for the city's elite. These clubs hosted lavish events and provided a space for the upper class to socialize and network. In addition to the luxurious residences and social institutions, the Upper East Side was also known for its cultural institutions, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Guggenheim Museum, which were established during this period. These institutions contributed to the neighborhood's reputation as a center of culture and refinement. On October 18, 1894, Stephen alleges that $50,000 in bonds had been stolen from his house, although the police are suspicious. Later, on October 7, 1896, Stephen forfeits the $5,000 bail for not showing up to court after having been released on bail the previous Saturday. On November 20, 1896, the court implies that Stephen is part of the Bowe, McLaughlin, Valentine group of swindlers. The Bowe, McLaughlin, Valentine group of swindlers, or the Valentine Gang, was a group of swindlers operating in New York City during the late 1800s. They were known for sophisticated and elaborate swindling operations, targeting wealthy individuals and engaging in complex financial fraud. The group's activities often involved deception, manipulation, and the exploitation of loopholes to carry out their schemes. The gang's notoriety stemmed from their ability to evade detection and law enforcement, as well as their audacious and high-stakes swindles. Their activities were a source of fascination and concern for the public and law enforcement authorities during the late 1800s. The group's exploits and the subsequent efforts to apprehend its members were widely covered in the media, contributing to their enduring legacy as one of the most infamous criminal organizations of the late 1800s. Luck had run out for Stephen, though, on December 22, 1896, as Dutton is sentenced to 3 years and a $5,000 fine. The following April 1897, Brother Simeon is sentenced to 9 months at Blackwell's Island for intent to defraud, including an attempt to defraud Hetty Green of $600,000. Both brothers were sentenced to Sing Sing Prison, located in Ossining, New York. The prison, which was first completed in 1898, was known for its strict and often harsh conditions. Inmates were required to maintain complete silence at all times, and the facility was considered one of the toughest maximum security prisons in the United States during that era. By 1900, Stephen and Brother Simeon have been released from prison and are living with oldest brother Alan at 281 2nd Street, New Jersey. Both are listed as brokers. Stephen indicates he is widowed, but the reality is his first wife, Cora, remarried and brought their children with her to the small town of Bath, New York. Freedom for Stephen, though, is short-lived, as on November 18, 1901, Stephen is charged with writing fraudulent checks for a bank that no longer existed. On February 22, 1902, he's sentenced to 10 years for forgery by the Supreme Court. He returns to Sing Sing, where he's held for the next 6.5 years, being let out on August of 1908. By the 1910 census, Stephen is living with his new wife, Maud, who is 31, in a rented apartment at 54 West 93rd Street, Brooklyn. He is listed as a mason builder and self-employed. He's also listed as born in 1846, which is about 12 years than his real age of about 51. Later that year, Stephen is charged with grand larceny and sentenced to 10 years. It is likely he served most of his sentence, as there are no records of Stephen until the 1920s. On October 4th, 1923, Stephen is charged again with stealing $3,000 worth of diving goods from 367 Ocean Avenue. He claimed he had owned 1,200 of 2,000 shares of the salvage company, but had been frozen out and was trying to get his money back. By February 7, 1925, he is charged with grand larceny of the second degree. Stephen is almost 80 when Humphrey Bogart plays Rock Valentine in a movie about the Valentine Gang, the swindling group he was a part of.
Hey, get that light off me. What's the idea?
Oh, just an accident, old man. Nothing to be upset about.
Yeah, well, don't let no more accidents happen. I ain't no guy you can push around like these other dopes.
Living by himself in a rundown shack on December 18, 1943, Stephen is severely burned, saving his cats and dogs from a fire. On December 27, 1943, Stephen dies of pneumonia. No one comes to claim Stephen's body, and he's buried on Hart Island. It was interesting to get to know you, Stephen Ansel Dutton.